the 18th and Grand of the Olympic Auditorium Story, the untold story of a knockout legacy. This is the Grapple with Rowdy Show, episode 85, where we talk to writer and director Steve DeBro. Okay, welcome to the Grapple with Rowdy Show. I've got an amazing guest today. He is the writer and director behind 18th and Grand, the Olympic Auditorium Story. Please welcome to the show, Steve DeBro. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Oh, so glad to be here, Brett.
Thank you. Now, our first question, if you're a first-time guest, it's always the same. Where did it begin for you?
It began watching the Olympic Auditorium on TV when I was a kid. And, you know, growing up in Los Angeles in the 1960s and 70s and before that, the Olympic was always on TV, whether it was boxing, wrestling, or roller derby. Weekly, it had a weekly show. And wrestling was just, you know, it was fascinating. It was wild. Roller derby was crazy. And my dad loved boxing, so I got to know all the Mexican American fighters who were really popular in Los Angeles and came up, like Danny Red Lopez and Bobby Chacon. But wrestling just captivated me and my sister, and we just like wrestle on the, in the bedroom watching it, and just like it was fun seeing guys like Freddie Blassie, and then later like Roddy Piper, and so many others that came up through the LA, the Destroyer, and all these other wrestlers that came up through LA, and so it was just fascinating to me. And so it lodged deep in the recesses of my consciousness.
So what was it then that made, obviously, like you said, growing up, you have all these memories of it. What was it that drew you to then making like a documentary about the story of the Olympic Auditorium? What was it about it?
I mean, jump forward many years. I was in, you know, I was really into music. I was a musician, and I worked for record stores, then record distributors, and record labels for years and years and years. And when that business was really upended by the digital revolution back in the early 2000s, um, I wanted to use my creative talents in different ways. And a friend of mine was is a journalist, and he showed me images from a show he curated at the LA Public Library about LA history, including a photographer by the name of Theo Errett, who was the house photographer at the Olympic Auditorium from the 1960s through the early 80s. And he shared these images, many of which are in the film, of boxing and wrestling. And the images just so blew me away, and also just sent me back in my memory banks of the Olympic Auditorium. And so he had done some work sort of trying to develop a book. And I remember saying to him, David, I think this is bigger than a book. I think there's something more here. And then once started digging into it, the history of the Olympic became really interesting to me as a way to tell a story about LA that hadn't been told, and that connected to so many different aspects of the city and the culture through this one place. And the fact it was run by a woman for 40 years was just kind of blew my mind. And that woman happened to be Jean LaBelle's mother made it also doubly interesting. So it just had this really, it just felt like a story that should be told. And the more and more I started talking to people, when you mention the Olympic Auditorium to people in Los Angeles of a certain age, they light up, whether it's the people, just fans, regular people who just saw it on TV, or then the participants, the boxers, wrestlers, skaters, musicians, managers, and behind the scenes people. It was such an important part of so many people's lives that I really felt like by diving into this, story about a city, a story about this place in the middle of a city, I could tell a bigger story um, about both LA and about the 20th century and wrestling and boxing and how they mattered, because every city had their own version, of the Olympic. It may not have been as big as the Olympic Auditorium, but whether it was, whether wherever you were across the world, most places had an arena or a venue that was boxing, wrestling related. And so it felt like it was both, important within just the city, but also had something to say about that culture that is kind of gone now, and what that what that meant of the time and how that connects to the present.
Yeah, definitely. And you're right. A lot of areas, a lot of cities around the world have all got that particular thing. I mean, for England, there's like Wembley Stadium in England. Dallas had the Sportatorium, Madison Square Garden, New York. But the Olympic Auditorium, though, does seem to be one of these places that is kind of uh, 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 like a holy ground, if you will. That one of those things, people talk about it in such a way. What is it that made it? What made it more than the average, especially nowadays, there are stadiums and arenas everywhere. But like, what is it that rose it up out of the venue? What was it that made it that sort of special place that?
I mean, I think it was a couple of things. I mean, it was a confluence of things. One, that it did it continuously for so long, I think, was one thing. The the fact that Eileen Eaton, who ran it from the early 1940s through the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, um, put on a weekly show um, that was that lasted and lasted for decades and decades. So there was a continuity. The fact it
Yeah.
was LA. So where you're in LA, it was a hub. It was a hub for Mexican wrestling in many ways, and a lot of the Mexican boxers and
Yeah.
wrestlers and skaters. It was also a hub on the way to Japan. So someone like an Andre the Giant, for example, who was so popular in Japan, would always stop in LA and wrestle at the Olympic along the way, for example. It was also a place like where, people like Roddy Piper came really was not he was, believe it or not, a baby face when he arrived at the Olympic Auditorium, and that was the first place where he was able um to turn into what his natural character was and find his
Yeah.
footing in many ways. And that was also in many ways due to Gene LaBelle, who took Roddy under his wing, took him to his dojo, trained him up,
Yeah.
and taught him the inside of the business. And someone like Gorgeous George, where different places take credit for Gorgeous George, and I would say that um, I'm not sure if the character that if George Wagner developed the character of Gorgeous George in LA, but he certainly perfected it in LA
Yeah.
because Eileen Eaton took him to Max Factor, where he got his, you know, hair and nails and all his whole. He perfected his shtick in LA and
Yeah.
really blew it up here because it's and it just the way it looked. The place was so it was very film noir esque. It was black and white, smoky. It was designed for boxing and wrestling. What was interesting is I was working on a project with the late that involved the late interviewing the late great Paul the Butcher Vachon, not long before he passed away. And I asked him, without telling him I'd done this project about the Olympic Auditorium, I said, so, what were some of your favorite places to wrestle? You wrestled all around the world. Where did you? He said, the Olympic Auditorium was the greatest place I ever wrestled. And I was sort of taken aback because he'd been everywhere. And I said, well, what was it? He said, well, the crowd was the way that the building was built, the balconies, and then the crowd was on top of you. And the energy in the place was really, really intense. There were riots regularly. Things were at a razor's edge in that place. And I think that, again, not to downgrade any other place, but this continuity of place, a place that opened in 1925 and lasted until 2005. The building is still there, but it's
Yeah.
now a Korean church. But the fact that it had this continuous programming for so long, had so many stars, was where so many movies were filmed, and just was this. It was a confluence of factors that made it such an interesting, legendary place.
Definitely. So how long then? Because obviously, like you got your memories of it and everything you've just discussed, and now you're like, okay, I'd like to do a documentary on this. That's got to be a lot of research because you're saying there's a lot of years there and a lot of things going on there. How
Yeah.
do you start with something like that?
Um, it was in fits and starts in the beginning because I had different partners who were involved for different pieces of time. Then they jumped off because, I was the only one who was just obsessed. And so I just, over on my shoulder over here is like my library of research books. And, I guess I just found it endlessly fascinating. So I would go back to reading about, how the building got built in the first place, why it was called the Olympic Auditorium. Well, because it hosted the 1932 Olympics boxing, wrestling, and roller derby. I mean, not roller derby, boxing, wrestling, and weightlifting competition.
Yeah.
And it was, well, the 1932 Olympics, why did it open in 1925? Well, LA was trying to get the earlier Olympics, and they wanted to show the Olympic Committee that, oh, look, we have venues already in case anyone falls out, because this was on the verge of the Great Depression, World War One, coming out of World War One. A lot of economies in Europe and England were really struggling after the war with all of the debt and everything else and conflict. So LA was just like, hey, we're over here. LA was a podunk town at the time. And it was remarkable that we even got the 1932 Olympics. So I just got obsessed and I started talking to people. And the more I got in, the deeper the story got to me. And I get obsessive. And so I just started digging and talking to more people. And then I said, I realized that if I don't, my cousin is a shooter. He's a DP, mostly for commercials. And I said to him, I was like, I think I'm obsessed with this Olympic story. And I think if I don't do it now, that many of these people will die and there won't be a chance to tell this story. And so would you do this? Will you, shoot this for me? And so I just started doing it. And I reached out to Gene LaBelle, because I knew he was in LA and this was his mother. And this was a story that was obviously important to him. And when I talked with him, I have a good story about that, where I went to see Gene, and he lives in this modest condo in Van Nuys out in the valley, not that far from where I grew up. And so I'd spoken with him on the phone. We had a really good conversation on the phone. And there's like, come on over and let's meet face to face. So we're there and we're talking and we're having just, what is a nice, normal conversation. And he's like poking around in his office and like pulling things out and showing me things. And then, all of a sudden, I feel something pulling at my throat, and I feel there's like a nightstick, like a police baton that's on that Gene has snuck up behind me, has this behind me, and is applying pressure to my throat, and pulling, and I'm like, Gene, hey, stop it, that's funny, but cut it out. And he just keeps applying pressure. And I'm like, Gene, please. And I'm, Gene, please, please stop. And finally he just, I'm like, he disappeared. It's the pressure's off my throat. And he's sitting back across this in his chair as though nothing happened. And I'm just like, and I think that was a way, I didn't like understand it at the time. I was just like, this guy's crazy. But what I came to understand, I think, was him letting me know that, if I'm going to let you do this, you have to know that I'm a serious guy and that I could kill you if I wanted to. So don't mess with me. And it worked, insofar as I was determined to finish this documentary once I started, because it's very easy to start a documentary and it's very difficult to finish one. There's many people who've started projects that just never get there. And this took me way longer than I'd hoped. But I became obsessed. Gene was my first interview. Gene opened doors to other people. And then I just kept going. And so I did 50 long form interviews, many other just conversations, phone interviews, other things, and tons of reading to make this happen. So, it's a long way of saying it was a very long process.
Was there anything as you were doing it? because again, there's so much to sort of take in as you're researching it. Was there anything that maybe changed the direction of where you wanted to go, or maybe you feel I'm going to do that, but then you found out about this, you thought, oh, I'll go that way instead, or was there anything like it maybe altered your thread?
Well, I mean, for a documentary, what alters your thread in many ways are the visual materials that you can come up with. Because I discovered there were certain stories that I loved that I wanted to include in the documentary that there just wasn't video or audio or still imagery to be
Yeah,
able to tell. They'd be great podcast things, but I wasn't making a podcast at that time.
yeah,
I was doing a film. So um, discovering it was really hard to make Aileen come to life because until I discovered this video footage that we had of her, it was really, really tricky. And the other hard part about the story in terms of telling it was I wanted to. There were some people who were like, well, Eileen's such an interesting character. It should just be about Aileen Eaton. And I was like, well, she is. However, this is also about the people who love the place and
yeah,
the fans and the athletes. And so what became very difficult, I picked an incredibly difficult editing job to do because I wanted to thread the needle between telling the story of the venue, the city, the woman who ran it, the key activities that happened there, and make sure that it was satisfying and moved quickly,
yeah,
because there's nothing, you know, I there's nothing more frustrating to me as an exciting subject that is rendered dull. And the Olympic was
yeah,
so exciting that I wanted to tell it in a way where you almost felt like you were the beginning of the film. You're walking into the place. You're disoriented by all of the action. It's almost sensory overload. And then when you leave, you're like, happen. I want more. And
yeah. No,
that's
definitely.
was what my intention became. And it took a long time to execute that as a film. So to go back to your original question, I knew all these pieces that I was hoping to kind of tell along the way. We did go down some alleys that both were richer and demanded telling, others that we couldn't find ways to tell within the storyline. So there was a lot of trial and error mostly in the editing process, because I had incredible coverage. I mean, I could do just the outtakes alone of this film are an incredible history of boxing, wrestling, and roller derby, music, punk rock, all of these things at
100%.
the time.
Just in watching it, I was just sort of picturing that there could easily be like a 10-hour version of this documentary with all the stuff that you've got. And I mean, what process did you have? Because obviously you need to chop things, you need to get a flow to it. In I mean, I know we live in a time now where you can have like the Blu-ray special edition with just chuck everything else on there or whatever it is. But when you're making that initial documentary, what was it like having to, I mean, I've done it on with things before. I've had to chop bits out that I didn't really want to chop out, but I needed it this way or that way, and I kind of get the pain of it. But I've never put as much time as you have into this.
Oh, it's painful. It's painful. There were things I love. I loved my first, like, I didn't know how to use other than just like cut the most basic, put a timeline together. My first cut was over 8 hours long. And that wasn't even with all the interviews. That was when I was still shooting it, just trying to make it, and so I was very fortunate to have two people in the editing part. I had many other people that helped the whole thing, but in terms of the editing process, I had a guy named Shane McClafferty, and really more the sort of flashy editor. He's all the things that are like super slick in the movie that are like cut. He's a drummer. He's a killer editor and cutting to rhythm and all that stuff. He did all that stuff. But the sometimes we would get to that and then we'd watch, I'd watch it with Mary McAnulty, who became my co-story editor. Um, look at it, we go, well, it's all great and looks great, but we're losing the story and I'm getting bored. And if I'm getting bored watching it, then something is wrong. And we would end up, sometimes we would just get, this was a very, sometimes, we would be thrilled. Sometimes we'd get pissed at each other. Sometimes but we just kept trying to hone down on the story, and you start to get in a way about what is serving us here. What's serving the storyline? You also want to have some humor. There were people that are really funny, and we wanted those lines, to shine within it. So all of that, yeah, I would say I think there were 30 edits of the film to get it to final, which is just, I mean, all of this it makes no sense. It makes no sense on a financial, on a time level. It doesn't. I think, there are many delays. The film was supposed to premiere in March of 2020 at the Cinerama Dome in Hollywood, which is a famous theater. It's a geodesic dome that opened in the 1960s. It had 900 seats, and we had sold 600 seats. We had a huge premiere red carpet planned, and then of course COVID hit, so that delayed the film further and really throttled our big plans for the movie in terms of having a sort of big launch. So the promotional aspect of the film got kind of, I mean, it is what it is. The world, there are many greater victims than me in our film. So I don't ever want to complain about it because it feels very selfish. But at the same time, it was designed for a theatrical thing, and we had a thought and plans on how to make this something that could launch out of LA and find other places and build to a larger audience. But it didn't work out that way. And the film has been loved and has been screened in many places, is available on Prime, it's available on Tubi and other streaming platforms. But what makes me really happy is that when I show the film, people love it. People love this movie, and it really resonates with a lot of different kinds of people. So that is, though it wasn't necessarily a financial winner, it works for people emotionally, and and I feel glad that I was able to document so many people, and so many people. I think almost half the people have died since the film has, we finished the film. Of the 50, there's at least 22, 23, 24 who are dead. So I feel like we captured the last of a dying era, one that I think, and one that I think still has resonance and matters today for those who want to learn from history. So
definitely. I mean, one of the things I liked about, like you say, how you did it, it's always been one of those places that for me, like I've read about it as a wrestling fan growing up and becoming a wrestler. Where I've seen pictures of it, watched matches there, and that sort of thing. But to be able to kind of almost tour the building in a way of like how you've done it, you can get that vibe, and because it's somewhere obviously that well, although the building's still there, it's not there anymore. So, but I think you have caught that on film, and you've gone through like the history of it as well. And I think an important footnote I feel that you captured. It's almost like a time capsule of that sort of almost 100 years really of all the different things around that, like from the building of it to the last shows that you caught all of that in your documentary. And I think one of the fascinating figures in there for me is where you mentioned earlier Eileen Eaton. I mean, I knew about having like been a bit of a fan of Gene LaBelle, read his book as well, and all that sort of thing. I knew a bit about her from that, but she seems to be kind of, I don't know if it's a gender thing or what, but she seems to get overlooked a little bit in the sort of sports history for what she achieved. And one of the things you do is sort of you definitely bring her to life in her story, and we get to see what she did and what she contributed. I mean, what was that like, bringing, especially if Gene LaBelle's mum and he sat there and he's got a nightstick. What was it like bringing that to life?
Um, I, I I mean, myself, having even grown up here, I was flabbergasted to like that I didn't know about Eileen Eaton, you know, because there's sort of the founding myths of every city and who are the important people, and um, and I think that she had uh, such importance to popular culture in Los Angeles. Um, and she was so like ruthless and brilliant and unique. So I really thought that that was one of the most important things that I could do was just sort of to make her to have her remembered a bit and give her her due. So I learned so much about her uh, her background, and just that I think she was just so determined to succeed on some level that it could have almost been anything, but it happened to be boxing and wrestling in this
Yeah,
venue. Like she was opportunistic in that she had done work for the LA Athletic Club, who owned the building, and it had been sort of a white elephant for them. I don't know if that expression travels, but basically
yeah,
a
yeah.
building that
We
had
got that.
not succeeded financially. It was big. It was hard, and then the depression came. So when you have the Great Depression come and you have a 10,000 seat building, the south end of downtown, not even in the main part of downtown, um, it's it was a challenge. Plus, LA was all mobbed up in those days, and there were people who were, everyone was stealing from the till. Basically, there was just it
Yeah,
was so the LA Athletic Club was sort of the absentee owner, and so they had all these promoters that basically were just grifting. So whether or not they, I I think it was a combination of both, promoters gone stale, plus, um, conditions outside the Olympic Auditorium, in the
yeah,
city, in the world. But she came along right, in the midst of World War II, and she was determined. Um, Her husband, Cal Eaton, was the face promoter for boxing and wrestling because a woman couldn't be that
yeah.
person. And she started as the general manager. And Cal, her husband, who wasn't Gene's father, he was like a stepfather, really. And
Yeah.
Gene would never even call him a stepfather because they disliked each other actively. Um, he, uh, you know, uh, Cal was mostly drunk at the golf course in the mornings. He wasn't there working while Aileen was, and she was the hard-nosed business person who would be doing the negotiations and especially in the early days, very creative. I mean, she was always creative promotionally, but I think when she saw someone like Gorgeous George, for example, she knew a star when she saw one.
Yeah.
And she saw she would I was very good at identifying star talent and helping to enhance that talent. And so um someone like Gorgeous George, later on Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali,
Yeah.
um, and she, with wrestling, I think she had her hands in it more early, and then she was in it. She was less involved later. She had really good when she had good promoters like the Hollywood Wrestling Office, which is a great story in and of itself. That was the wrestling promotion that
Yeah.
consisted of Freddie Blassie, Mr. Moto, and Jules Strongbow were the key promoters from the uh, early '60s through the early to mid '70s, and they did a great job of bringing in talent like Mascaras and talent from Mexico and some lucha aspects, and then developing people like the Destroyer, um, Blassie and the Blassie Tolos gimmick that was such a huge thing that culminated in what was the biggest gate at the time, the Blassie versus Tolos at the LA Coliseum, um, and just being clever and smart and understanding the ethnic makeup of the city, and so making sure there were Mexican and Mexican American wrestlers. So she was just very clever promotionally, and so I think it was great to tell that story of her and what she meant to sports in Los Angeles.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what do you think would have been like you say, in the climate of that time as a female promoter, even if it was like behind the scenes as such, because like you say, we was her husband was it was the promoter on paper type thing. You know, what qualities then was it, or did she have to, or what sort of land did she have to negotiate? Because I'm imagining, and sort of, you read all these books about promoters and that, and you get these kind of ideas of sort of the without offending anyone, the seediness of the promotion side and the cutthroatness of it all, and to have her, and she looks like a woman who would stand her ground quite authoritatively. What was that like at that time? Because again, that must have been promotions and the auditorium aside, that must have been a shock to start with.
Well, I mean, I know that a couple things. I know that for one, in the very big beginning, when when she was hired, along with Al, who was not her husband at the time, um, and Babe McCoy, who was the boxing promoter, who was very, very connected with organized crime, Mickey Cohen's tight friend, and
Yeah.
sort of the very connected with East Coast mob syndicates. He said, I'm not going to work for that woman. I'm not going to work with this woman. And the owner of the LA Athletic Club, or the guy who ran the athletic club, said to her, well then you're not going to work here. So she had that support of Frank Garbutt, which in the beginning that mattered a lot. So she knew that, because he was a boxing fan, number one. I don't know if he was really a big wrestling fan, but he was a boxing fan. He had this arena that was losing money all the time, and he just wanted it in essence, to break even, so he wasn't losing money on this place.
Yeah.
And he thought, well, here's someone who's smart and analytical and has her eye on the bottom line and isn't just trying to sell me a load of BS. And so he had her support. So that, I think, was important. I think also fundamentally, she was not intimidated, and was smarter than most of these guys. Like
Yeah.
as ruthless as some of these people were, she knew how to kind of both charm when she needed to, but also hold her ground. Um, and then later, she had Gene LaBelle, her son, which I have in the
Yeah.
movie where everyone knew that Gene was both extremely um, a competent fighter, and was able to could hurt anybody, who could hurt the biggest boxer or wrestler. And even though Gene was like my height, he was like whatever, 5'6", 5'7", maybe, he was incredibly fit, incredibly well trained in jujitsu, like in all the martial arts, in
Yeah.
grappling, in every aspect of the fighting arts. And people didn't want to mess with Gene. And so I think that if she felt, I mean, it's in the film too, if she felt that there was anyone who was coming in because they were upset about something, Gene would sit in on the meeting. And just his mere presence in these situations. And Gene was also all over the arena. He was where there were riots often. There was violence in the place. It was a place that, whether it was boxing, wrestling, roller derby, music, the place was volatile. And Gene was like, acted like, he would put out fires physically. So people would see that he would hurt people. This was a day before,
Yeah.
lawsuits really. And so he would break people's arms. He would do stuff where people were just, not gonna mess with Aileen. So it's a long way to say that there was a combination of things that she used as leverage to, both her own wit and also having the support of others and Gene as her muscle when need be. So I think those were all things that helped her.
No, no, definitely. I mean, you talk about the wrestling, and the wrestling is quite a big part of the documentary. And from one of the other things that I think the Olympic, or it stood out to me, the auditorium stood out to me, is that they always seem to, or for most of the time, they did their own thing. Whilst a lot of people sort of bowed down to the National Wrestling Alliance and things like that, I mean, they kind of ran their own thing. They had their own champions or world champions, but people still came there. Like Andre came there, Lou Fez went there, Ricky Dozan when he'd come over, especially with Freddie Blassie, they had a few
Absolutely. Yeah.
big things there. It wasn't one of these outcast sort of outlaw things that were sort of looked down upon. They had a big thing and they were doing their own thing, which was rare at the time. What is it about, you think, that sort of the Olympic that just sort of made people want to compete there and made it that kind of place where it was its own wrestling, I guess, its own wrestling organization at a time when that was rare?
Well, they stepped in and out of the cartel. Like they were part of the National Wrestling Alliance for periods of time. They, in the 50s, they were the subject of a lot of, both on the boxing side and on the wrestling side, where, you know, Aileen loved a good monopoly too. So she had her elbows out in terms of with other promoters, with other, so I think that she had a sense that they were the biggest, most important game on the West Coast, and that between her muscle, the strength of the alliances that she had and then sometimes stepped away from, the strengths of her promoters. Because I mean, really, for that, the really until it got spotty after Jules Strongbow left. It was in the 70s. It really, I think Rock Rims said it well when he told me that, that the Chavo Piper battle was sort of the last gasp of the Eaton, the LaBelle Eaton kind of empire, when they brought Leo Garibaldi, who had once wrestled at the Olympic Auditorium and was a star with his brothers, the Garibaldi brothers, back in the 1940s and 50s. He came back in a promoter and really helped push things, push them to prominence again. But I think that it was a combination of promotional heft, a sense that they were the strongest game in town. They did, for a period of time, really have a monopoly. There was the Hollywood Legion before that, and some of the smaller promotions. But by the late '50s, the Legion was phasing out, and then the Forum didn't come until the late '60s, and there were some shows out of the Forum. But she had a sense of her strength and muscle, and wasn't going to be, forced to do what she
Yeah.
didn't want to do.
No, and it's such an interesting territory as well. And I guess a lot of that comes from what you were saying earlier about the obviously like the airports and the traveling thing as well. Because again, you'd have your Andre and let's say Ricky Dozan, even like guys like Adrian Street from England, and that would come over before he even, later on he pretty much moved over there. But well, he did. But like, and then you had all these different characters coming through, Mil Mascares, all the luchadors. What was it that made it like this sort of? It was like a melting pot of all these different ingredients. What how does that link to someone who's not? Well, I've never been to LA, and I know that there's a multicultural thing there. To people watching it, like maybe outside of that area, could you sort of talk about that a little
Sure,
bit? Really?
sure,
So that,
sure. I mean, if you think about it, demographically, LA is incredibly diverse, with a large population, not just of people of Mexican descent, but a lot of Japanese, a lot of Filipinos, a lot of and also the Olympics territory was wide. So they besides the Olympic, there were other venues that they, during the rest of the week, they were promoting. So they were promoting up in Ventura, up in Bakersfield, in down towards San Diego. They had a lot of power in that way too, because people could come. It was a big territory, so you could work. The best wrestlers could come and get work. It wasn't just the Olympic. So
yeah,
that was also a draw that people may not realize, was that, you could go, Ventura, Santa Barbara, work your way up the coast through Central Valley and back down towards the Mexican border. So when you have all of that, you also become a draw, because people, it's not a one and done. So you can work
yeah,
throughout the week. So there's that. And then I think that, you have within its own territory, there's different, ethnic makeups of the different. Some areas are pretty Anglo and pretty white. Some are pretty Mexican. Some are, so you have a varied population even within the territory. So then obviously the proximity to the Mexican border. So many Mexican fans who were so loyal and so loved wrestling and boxing, who, as time went on, as the demographics of downtown LA changed. So, I tried to make that also clear in Los Angeles, that, you had in the mid 60s, after the Watts riots in 1965, white flight out of downtown LA and out of a lot of neighborhoods. So you had a lot of, in those areas, you had a lot more Latinos moving in, and they became the most loyal audience to the Olympic Auditorium, especially, so so that while the Latino audience was always a part of the Olympic Auditorium, by the early 70s, it became the bulk of that audience. So it really so in terms of um, promotion wise, you know, the cleverness of Strongbow and company and their relationships to Japan and Inoki and New Japan Pro Wrestling, and there was a strong relationship there. So between Ricky Dozan going and the Destroyer coming back, like all of those, that
Yeah, forgot about
interplay.
him.
And yeah, the Destroyer made his career in Japan and lived off that for the rest of his life. And that the battle with Ricky Dozan was an enormous event, and Blassie. So that there was just a very, and then of course, Mascaras and Mexico City. There was just an interplay locationally. So it was, and a lot of the New York wrestlers really didn't get over it. Like when they came to New York, Bruno Sammartino, who was obviously enormous in New York and across the East Coast. Lou Thesz did get over in LA, but Bruno didn't. Some of the other East Coast wrestlers didn't get over, but as you said, Adrian Street, man, he became a sensation. I spoke with him over the phone. I wanted to get him in the documentary. It just never lined up because he was living in Florida, so I couldn't get out there to. But he was, he had a real. Again, it was sort of like the end of the Eaton promotion or the LaBelle promotion, but he kind of caught fire at the end and brought the sort of gorgeous George gimmick to another level that had been so popular in LA.
Because didn't that the Grunt the wrestling movie, which is like Tolos is in it, Adrian Street's in it, and there's a lot of the Destroyers in it without the mask and all that, and no one realizes it's him. But didn't that have that was linked in somewhere along like I don't know if they did any filming there, but it was definitely like the talent that was around at the time were in that film. I wasn't sure if they filmed at the Olympic Auditorium or it was just they used their people.
Um, I don't know. I don't know. I can't.
I think they made it look like the auditorium, and it was somewhere else. But it's one of them kind of. I think there's a couple of maybe the crowd shots was from there, but then the other bit was, like I think they done like that. But I know it's a lot of that sort of who were on the roster at that point were in that movie. Mondo Guerrero. I'm trying to think who else was there. But yeah,
it was the very end of the Eden promotion, and basically what had happened was that Jeff Walton, who was promoting at the time and was one of the announcers, told me that, and he was working with Mike LaBelle, that basically they got pushed out of the Olympic Auditorium. The building sold, and the Olympic promoters got pushed out towards the end. So I don't know. It was like right at that early 80s.
Time, yeah.
I think it could have been. It was so that a lot of those wrestlers who were part of that were kind of looking for a place to go, and they just sort of were. Yeah, so guys like Tolos, who had been so important, had moved on. Blassie had gone to New York. It was just sort of breaking apart. Vince Jr. had come into LA and was starting to do shows at the sports arena. So it was just, it was really the ebbing of what, and then, there were a lot of promotions that did come in after the Eaton promotion, particularly Lucha promotions really did very well, and some other more hardcore wrestling, groups came in too, promotions came
Yeah.
through. So it did have there was an interesting, I just
Yeah.
focused because I needed a place to stop, and because
Oh, yeah, I can
I,
imagine.
I,
Yeah.
Eileen's sort of story arc informed the film. I just, again, as crazy as it is, and as much as I did, I could do so much more if I really, you know, if I had more time and another
Yeah.
lots of money and a
Yeah.
bigger life. But
No, it's fair enough. What about then the boxing side? I mean, the wrestling side of it is a big deal when we talked about that. But boxing, I mean, some of the biggest names in boxing pass through there,
yeah,
again, and have matches there and that. What was was it the same for boxing? Was it that same sort of draw? Was there any kind of um rivalry maybe of like who can draw the most between the boxers and the wrestlers, that sort of thing? Or,
I
because
think it was
there's
very.
or,
I
or
think it was
maybe
very with.
who had the biggest riot? Maybe sorry, maybe
Oh
who had
well,
the
I'm
biggest
sorry. I'm
riot?
sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt. I would
That's right.
say Eileen was very pragmatic. I think that fundamentally she always was. She loved, in her heart, her favorite was boxing. So, but there was a chunk of time when wrestling made more money. Then there was a chunk of time in the early 60s when roller derby came along and roller derby was making the money.
Yeah,
So it was for her, it was, the story has been told, many times, many places, but when television came along, television both in the beginning really helped the popularity of wrestling in particular, and boxing. But when it achieved saturation, um, by the time the late 50s and early 60s came along, it started to really affect the gates at venues across
wow.
the world. And so places like the Olympic, like pretty much everywhere, they were struggling to keep, and think about a 10,000 seat venue, to try to keep an audience in, keep that building filled. So for her to go to boxing, I mean, boxing was doing worse than wrestling in the early 60s. Um, it was, they had a weekly card going, a weekly wrestling boxing card since the 30s. And they had to stop doing a weekly boxing card. They were doing like a monthly boxing card.
Yeah,
And then focusing on big shows, promoting outside of the Olympic Auditorium, doing big shows at Dodger Stadium, for example. There was a show at Dodger Stadium, the one and only boxing match at Dodger Stadium, which is an sort of amazing thing. And the reason it was the one and only was that, Davey Moore, who was the world champion, died not in the ring, but right after the fight. And Dodger Stadium, which pictured itself as a place for family entertainment, saw boxing and saw people dying as bad for business. So from that point forward, they banned boxing. So there were all these attempts to do bigger shows at the Coliseum, and at the Coliseum and Sports Arena and other larger venues. But starting in the mid 60s, they decided that they were going to focus on developing local boxers, and really she doubled down on boxing. So that brought many of the stars that we remember today, who came up and became international world
yeah,
champions. So people like Bobby Chacon, Danny Libred Lopez, Mondo Ramos, were all sort of came up through the Olympic Auditorium, and they really were able to rebuild their boxing office, our
yeah.
boxing business, through local promotion, and deciding to double down on that and really develop stars. from the neighborhoods of Los Angeles. And they would pit many times boxers from Mexico versus Mexican American boxers. Many times the Mexican boxers were more popular than the Mexican American boxers because the crowd was just, really the, the borders were more open in those days. So
Yeah.
Mexicans could come for the weekend, visit their families, do stuff, see a fight, come back home. And
Yeah.
so, Lupe Pintor and many other big fighters, that's why a guy named Julio Cesar Chavez won his first title in Los Angeles at the Olympic Auditorium. So there was just an interplay between, boxing and Mexico, boxing and Japan too. So there were some similar things to wrestling. Both were subject to the same market forces.
Mm.
I think Aileen was certainly way more directly involved in boxing, particularly starting in the early 60s, where she really put most of her energy into boxing and trusted wrestling to Strongbow and then her son Mike and then Gene to some degree as the announcer later.
Yeah.
So it was really, I think one of the most interesting things about the Olympic was that it was a show, that there were so many people who were part of the show that were there from the 1940s through the 1980s. It was like a family, which was really interesting to me too. Jimmy Lennon, the announcer,
Yeah.
whose son became a huge wrestling announcer,
So, yeah.
started as the announcer for both boxing and wrestling in the 1940s and lasted until the early 80s and was in so many films as well.
Yeah,
so
definitely, yeah.
That interplay, I didn't mention that earlier too, but one of the things that made such a difference in the Olympic and why is the Olympic unique was that it was a part of television and movies from the time it opened, from Buster Keaton to the Three Stooges to Rocky and Raging Bull, Million Dollar Baby, Ed Wood, all of these, films were shot at the Olympic Auditorium. So it was part of the fabric of entertainment. And I think Aileen Eaton saw it all, boxing and wrestling and roller derby and whatever, as entertainment. So she was very much, while boxing was near and dear to her heart, she loved wrestling insofar as it was part of entertainment and you could develop stars and you could, build a business and the fans cared. And, she was about the fan experience. And I think, not to overdo it here, but, I think that these days, why did the Olympic matter? Because the promoter cared about delivering for the fans an experience, whatever it was, that was satisfying. They didn't insult their fans. I mean, it got a little shabby towards the end, as she was aging and Mike didn't care so much and whatever. But for the bulk of the thing, there was a very distinct attention paid to the fan experience. And so I think that was a big part of why the Olympic was able to do what it did for so long and why it still is in the hearts and why when you're first, to go back to your initial questions, like why did it matter? Because people had a great time at the Olympic Auditorium. They put on shows that gave people their money's worth. People left feeling like they wanted to come back because they saw a great show, whatever it was, and it was exciting. And I'm going to go back there. This was a unique, great experience. It was the best place to put it was a good value for your entertainment dollar. So that's, one of the main things that I forget to say sometimes, or that I don't think about sometimes, is like being focused on the fan experience, which I think for a building owner these days, they're so far apart from it. They're booking a building. A multi-purpose building.
I
They do
mean,
not care. They do not care about what goes in there as long as they're getting paid.
amazing. That's why we're in a point now where the people that are booking it don't even are not even there for the shows. Do you know what I mean? It's got to that point now, isn't it? So they don't even, like you say, they're looking at the take-ins or whatever and the profit or whatever. But then whatever happens, and they've not even been to look at it or see it. It's just it's a scary world like that. I don't know. You just sort of yeah, like you say, the disconnect is clear when it's not working, because people are not paying attention to their audience. I think you're
I
right
mean,
on that.
the destroyer told me this amazing story about Aileen Eaton, for example. Um, he said that one night he was wrestling, and of course, a mask matters a lot to a masked wrestler, and
Oh yeah.
revealing your face, and some fan was there trying to tear the mask off of him, and Aileen grabbed this fan and pulled him off of her, and he was astounded that the woman, this little woman who was maybe 5'3", 5'4", who weighed probably 100 pounds, was you know was protecting the gimmick, was there, was
Yeah.
there in that cared that much. So I think that's like a real, when people talk about today's wrestling and yesterday's wrestling, or today's sports and yesterday's sports, and you think about that level of detail and care, of, like, she gave her life to that place. She smoked like 3 packs of cigarettes a day. She was, and when she went home, she talked about it. It was her sole focus, really. It was her obsession. And so um, if I'm obsessed with the Olympic story, I'm nowhere, it was like, part of it may just be in honor of Eileen's, like, dogged, sense
Yeah,
of this being something that mattered to her. And I'm not nearly what, I don't smoke and I don't live my life for it, but I do think that we've lost something human. We're in a place of, AI, and we're in a place of this sense that humanity doesn't matter. It's this, our tech overlords are here to sort of give us their inhumane version of the world. And I think it's really important to hold up for all of the faults of humanity, for every single one of them, which we all know well, for
yeah,
all of the terrible things. We are human, and we need to go back to some level. We need to step back and assert our humanity. There are so many wrestling promotions in LA now, which is very heartening. Indie wrestling is everywhere, and it's all different kinds. It'll happen in bar rooms. It'll happen in There's just a zillion different promotions, lucha promotions, and that to me is exciting. That exists. Boxing is dysfunctional as a business, though people love boxing, and there's still many things going on. Obviously, judo, MMA is huge, but I do worry about the structure of that too, in terms of being under one man and
yeah.
one sort of central thing. I get it, and I get why that works on some level, and one understands why the WWE works on some level. I get that it tells stories that people still relate to, and showcases fighters that are, some of whom are the greatest in the world. And so I don't want to I don't want to diminish that, but I also want to say there needs to be a place for um, uh, independent scenes, for um, people who are looking at their product and care about it, and not in a way where it's like I care about it like I'm going to make all my wrestlers take steroids and destroy their lives. Care about it,
Yeah.
to create a monoculture. The thing that the American territory system um, was interesting in that it allowed people to evolve and different characters to appeal to different um, areas,
Yeah.
and build their careers and change their roles and change their characters, and and um, maybe its time was done when Vince came along. I mean, Vince Jr. came along. I
Yeah.
don't. I think there's a very good argument to say that he came along as cable TV came along, where you could create something that worked across a national and then a worldwide audience. But I do think that something was lost in that process too. And so I think that by holding up these stories of the past and highlighting these stories, I think it matters still on some level. Maybe I'm old
Oh,
fashioned, but
definitely. No, I think you hit the nail on the head there. And a thing that I got from watching the documentary as well, especially like with looking at what Eileen brought across to it, and that as she went through and through the wrestling, through the boxing as well. When I mean, to be honest, if you look at even like the Mexican American boxers, and even as it's gone into the UFC and that now, I mean, you can trace that back to that and that promotion and giving that platform. And I think the roots go back that way. And also, then what I liked as well is in the documentary, it goes through the crazy world of roller derby, which appeared in England on the cable channel when I was a kid, and I loved it. And then it vanished again, and it was just some crazy sport. And again, it's very punk rock, very rock and roll. And then later on, as we get into the sort of 80s side of it, you get all these punk bands that come in, and I think that's kind of what that building. I get from that building. It was very punk rock. I mean, in England, we sort of say punk rock is a bit DIY. It's do it yourself. Bands went out there, they did it, and I think that's what I think she's basically been a punk since the start. She came in and done it to her own beat of her drum. She interacted with the promote. Well, we're talking about the NWA now. When it was needed, she was there, but they did their own thing. The same with boxing. She was picking who to push and taking people under her wing, giving them the guidance, and it's kind of led through that. So that was kind of my. I liked how you kind of brought all those shows in at the end and all the different legendary punk bands that played there, because I think it was almost like an exclamation mark on the spirit of the building for me.
Yeah, that was the goal, was because I knew that. I mean, what's funny, and you I'm sure know this quite well. You know, sometimes people, they're boxing fans that hate wrestling. They're wrestling fans that hate boxing. There's punk fans that hate everything. There's
Yeah.
like, so I was like, what I was trying to get across was that whatever you want to say, because I knew that some of the boxing people who are some of the most judgmental, I love boxing and I love my fans, I love my friends who are in boxing, I love the boxers, don't get me wrong, and my dad was just like this. Oh, wrestling's stupid. you know why do you like that? It's fake. All of this crap. and
Yeah.
and so what I was trying to get across was that the energy of place, the activities of what was going on, was very kinetic, was very visceral, was very intense, whatever you want to call it, violent, whatever you want to call it. There was some kind of common energy, which was uh, whatever it was, whatever decade you looked at the Olympic Auditorium, whatever activity you looked at at the Olympic Auditorium, there were political rallies there that turned violent. I mean, it was a place where there was conflict, was the battle between two people or more than two people was the stage at the Olympic Auditorium, whether it was the ring or the stage or the speaking podium, whatever it was.
Yeah.
The energy of the place was that of working out our conflicts, you know, um, uh, whether you like it or not, or whether you think it's positive or negative. Um, there's a commonality, and it's always existed, where people need to have a place to, whether it's to watch theatricalized conflict play out,
Yeah.
watch real conflict play out, skaters do crazy things and then bash each other.
Yeah.
It's cathartic for an audience to view that. And sometimes at the Olympic Auditorium, the audience was really part of it. So I'm doing a photo show right now in LA and
Yeah.
moving it around, called No Spectators. The concept being that at the Olympic, whatever you were watching, there weren't spectators. You were a participant.
That's
You
right.
were,
Yeah.
whether you were in the ring or in the crowd, that visceral energy, that part of it, there was often no barrier between crowd and performer. And so I think that that is what the deeper level of thinking, having spent so much time on this
Yeah.
project, is like, what brought all these things together? I mean, I don't know why in this place, but why does it matter what holds true today? And I think that the truth is that for whatever reason, humanity is in a battle, you know, um, whether we're battling against forces outside our control. The thing that's nice about a wrestling match, an MMA match, a boxing match, um, it is a chance to see a battle that will resolve itself. Because the things that, you know, as someone else said to me, the fight, the stuff about your boss, you can't punch your boss in the face, but you can go to a match and watch someone else punch someone out and be able to feel some kind of resolution or some kind of catharsis. Get your anger out, get your feelings out, scream at the bad guy, cheer for the good guy, whatever it is. You get to do that in places like the Olympic Auditorium,
Yeah.
wherever you are. And that's the universal bit that we're all like, why do we care? Why do I care? I don't even, I'm a nonviolent person for the most part, but I'm fascinated by violence. I'm fascinated by this thing because I think there's some meaning in it. There's something that is universal in it. And why do we care? Maybe we care because it's something that maybe we can do, train ourselves and um, become an amateur. But to watch someone do this at the highest level is really, is very exciting, and it has something that resonates.
Definitely. No, I like that. That is almost like that's what we can, that's the lesson that the Olympic Auditorium teaches today. I like that. Yeah, no, that's what we can take from that, I think. That's going to lead to my next part. If someone's watching this and they're like, I've never heard this before, and they go and watch your documentary and they go, right, I want to learn more about this, where should they start after they've watched your documentary?
Well, I mean, you can go to our website, which is 18thandgrand.com, And within there, there's a lot of links. YouTube, from there is a link to our YouTube, which has both some, outtakes and excerpts from the film, but it also has lots of wrestling and boxing matches, and roller derby from the Olympic Auditorium. So you can just watch those matches. I think that's, so you can get a sense of over time of some of the performers, some of the fighters,
Yeah.
some of the skaters that performed at the Olympic Auditorium. Um, there's We did a large scale. I co-curated a large scale exhibition at a museum called La Plaza di Cultura y Artes, which there's a link to that also on the website. And within there, the exhibition is not up, but if you look under past exhibitions, there's a 3D tour of the show. So
Nice.
within that, there's a lot of really great artifacts we put together for the show. The show was as exciting as the movie is. The show was just incredible. We had Freddie Blassie's ring jacket from the 1960s. We had Gory Guerrero, who was the father of the Guerreros, one of his wrestling robes that he wore at the Olympic back in the 1950s. We had, so incredible lucha masks. We have incredible photography, artwork, everything, 2 floors. So you can scroll your way through, do a 3D tour, read the different text panels. So there's a lot more information there. And then there's Jean LaBelle's book, which is not so accessible. You can poke around and find a lot of things. I'm trying to put a book together. Maybe one day that'll happen. I have ideas to do that. I have certainly all the pieces to do it. And I'm doing more exhibitions. So if you find yourself in LA, there's ways to look at the photographs currently. So those are really some of the main ways. There's some other really good, Rock Rims did a couple of books on wrestling in Southern California. Again, I don't know how available they are outside the US, but
Yeah.
probably if you paid a ton in shipping, you might be able to get one. But there's some other things, there's some other resources about this history and the specific scenes that are available. And in boxing, Gene Aguilera, who's in the film, did some books on Southern California boxing and the Olympic Auditorium. So there's there are publications, there's bits and pieces, but in terms of being from outside the U.S., I think looking through watching the film and looking through the 3D tour of the exhibition are a couple of good accessible ways
Yeah,
to
definitely.
to see that, and YouTube.
I'll be on that later. I'll put all those links into our show notes as well. So if you go on the website, they'll be in the show notes. So if you're looking for those, everyone, that's where they'll be as well. So yeah, no. Well, thank you so much for taking time today to do this. It is an awesome documentary. It was a pleasure to watch. I've still got about 10 pages of questions, but maybe we'll do another one because there's so much there. Probably stuff that, yeah, yeah, it's just
I'm
amazing.
sorry,
It's such a,
I tend to. I hope I wasn't too long, but I want to try to like
no,
wrap up the
no,
thoughts in a good
no.
package.
It's all been brilliant. But again, it's because so much happened there. There's so many things to ask about and ask you about and all that. I'll go with my final question. Once you finished it and put that documentary out there, had anything changed about how you viewed the Olympic Auditorium?
Um, I think only just, I think the insights get a little bit deeper about like why,
Yeah,
because I knew it was interesting, um, when I was doing it and making it, and through the subsequent life of a film that came out in 2021 and we're in 2026 and it's still has a life. I do screenings regularly. I have another big photo show currently, and it had, the museum exhibition won a national award, very prestigious, United States, that had nothing to do with wrestling, but like a prestigious award from National Historic Society about why the Olympic matters. So I think my only sort of revelations that have come have just been a deepening of understanding as to, number one, like, why would I personally spend so much time on this thing? And number two, because it's just like, okay, I mean, um, I sort of I got sucked down a rabbit hole, I tell people sometimes, of this project, but it really does continue to yield insights for me. And having people I meet with just, tell me how much it mattered to them and connect with people about this mysterious place that somehow had this, like a tuning fork. when it was when it was rung, it's still, I mean, it's still, or like a ripples in a pond, it's
Yeah.
still rippling. And so I think that's the only thing, is that it still um, has resonance and still is teaching me personally something, and that I think there's still lessons for other people within it, even though so many of the people have passed away, and it's only, while the building is there, it's a shell. And I'll leave you with this. Um, I've gone to um, I've gone to services at the Korean church who now occupy the Olympic Auditorium. The building in many ways is the same as it ever was. They don't utilize the whole building. The whole balcony and upper deck is almost the same as it was when it closed. And the light rig where that is a square that sits where the ring used to be, is still there. And underneath there, where the faithful worship, they moved the pulpit to the side where the stage was for the punk rock shows. But
Yeah.
the most demonstrative parishioners are there under that light rig talking to Jesus. They are there, you know, emoting and connecting with some higher power. So I like to think that there's some energy in this spot, that there's that within that, there is something that is, though it's a different way of worshiping, though there's a different way of connecting to something outside yourself, to something to believe in, to something that, maybe, we don't recognize in a way, it's because it's in Korean and it's whatever. There's
Yeah.
some kind of emotional and physical energy that's coming from this spot. So take that how you want, but it's very interesting to me how that that human need to connect on some spiritual higher level, that can happen physically through sport or through, activity, or through connecting to a mystical being, is there.
Ah, that's cool. No, I like that. It's still, it's still, no, I like that. It's still like a source or something. Yeah, totally get what you mean there. Oh, that's brilliant. Well,
I mean,
thank you so much again. It's awesome because it's just the fact that it's still there is nice, and the fact that, like you say, it's being used. There's still an energy in the building, and it's still, because so many places are car parks now, as well. Like places that should have been preserved, should have been kept or something. They're all, and it's no, it's nice that it's still there. Like you said, and there's an energy in the building. So no,
And all of the
I totally get that.
the people, yeah, the people who there's a lot of fight fans who are very angry about the fact that it's a church, and I'm like, look, I get it, I do. I mean, it would be great if it could be converted back or whatever. It's 100 years old now, which in
Yeah.
in England doesn't mean that much, but in LA means an incredible amount. It's really unusual. But that it's over 100 years old. It's about to have its 101st birthday on August 6th. So that it, because of them, it still exists. It would have been torn down and been a car park or
Yeah.
a high rise or something else. So I I don't I try to just sort of say, okay, well, look, I drive past it. I'm doing this photo show right around the corner from it, and I see it, and I'm just like, there it is. It's still the same building. The young people don't know what it is or what it was, but I do, and other people do.
Yeah, no, definitely. Oh man, hopefully I'll get to check it out one day when I save up my pennies. But no, awesome again. No, thank you so much for coming on. Because again, I'll probably drag you back at some point, especially if you get on with the book, come back on and we'll get on to that as well, and I can get into all my other questions because it's such a rich history. Go and check it out, everyone, because there's so much that's happened in that place, and I think you've documented it brilliantly. And to somebody who hasn't got a clue about it, they can watch that, and the whole vibe is there. The whole package is there of like the experience of it. And I think you've done a brilliant job. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Steve, for taking the time to join us this week and share all the work and all the passion that went into the 18th and grand the Olympic Auditorium Story. Please check out the show notes for all the links and everything and all the work Steve's done, because it is amazing and there's so much there for grappling fans, for boxing fans, for music fans, for everyone. So really do go and give that a look and check out their website as well. We'll be back next week with another guest. I have been your host, Brett Summers. New episodes of the Grapple of Your Eye show drop every Thursday at 7 a.m. UK time, and you can watch those on YouTube, or you can listen to them on Audible, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all the other podcast apps that are out there. Please give us a like and a listen and a share. It really does help lift us out of the mire of podcasts that are all out there vying for your attention. As I say, we'll be back next week with another guest from the multiverse of grappling. So please stay tuned and wait and see who we got for you next week. But as I say, this episode is now coming to an end. So stay safe and stay on the mats.